Hello, everyone. We're live at the St. Gabriel studio. I'm Father Adam Streitenberger. With me is our beloved Bishop, Bishop Robert Brennan. Welcome, Bishop.
Thank you, Father Adam, and welcome to everyone who's joining us on St. Gabriel Radio and on Facebook Live. This is getting to be a regular thing.
It is, yeah,
it's exciting.
I'm excited. So we're here for a purpose. You know, our Holy Father, Pope Francis, put out a new encyclical letter, Fratelli Tutti. He put it out. It came out on October the 3rd. The vigil for the feast of St. Francis of Assisi.
That's right.
So maybe I could just kind of do a little intro for everyone, and then we'll let you kind of guide us on what the Holy Father has given us.
We have an awful lot to unpack here, and I think we'll just scratch the surface today. And we'll be dealing with this for a while.
It's 270 some paragraphs, so
there you go. So we spend a minute on each paragraph.
Yeah. So of course, it's inspired by Saint Francis's interaction with the Sultan in Egypt. And it's really at the heart, I think, it is this sort of fraternity and social friendship, that the human person, part of our we have this great dignity as human persons, and even more so that we're called really to live as a community, transcending all borders and everything like this concept of social friendship, which the Holy Father describes. But basically a quick outline. So first, kind of inspired by the experience of COVID, the Holy Father points out some problems that COVID has kind of revealed to us, the pandemic has revealed to us, but also, I think even outside of the pandemic, things that we would have seen. And it's really a very nice commentary, I think, on our contemporary society, and we can touch about some of those. And then he turns to the parable of the Good Samaritan, which, it's interesting, is the gospel reading for today's daily Mass.
That's right. You know, somebody else was preaching today, so I didn't look until later, and I said, wow, look at that. Here we are.
It all works out. Maybe he had it in mind.
That's right.
Then he kind of switches to the solutions to these problems, which ultimately is this concept of social friendship. We could kind of see it also in the terms of solidarity, which is this point from our church's social teaching. This social friendship also involves dialogue, authentic dialogue, encounter with each other, a genuine encounter with each other. And in the process, in that kind of giving us the solutions, he also critiques a few other little issues. So there's so much in here, even in paragraphs 270, the kitchen sink is even mentioned. The kitchen sink and whatnot.
The kitchen sink.
So, Bishop, I was wondering, what are kind of your thoughts? You know, there's so much we could talk about with this document, but
again, I think it is something we will be coming back to many times, just as we've been coming back to so many of his writings, Laudato Si, The Joy of the Gospel, Christus Vivit. We have all of these pearls of wisdom, and you can see a certain continuity as you go through it. So much of what you see here, he did address in a very small way in The Joy of the Gospel. Mm-hmm. In those middle chapters of The Joy of the Gospel, he spoke about a lot of this. And as you said, he was thinking about this and working on it, and then the pandemic struck. And in a sense, the pandemic really taught us, exposed, if you will, a lot of the things he had been already thinking about. Hence the title, Fratelli Tutti, we are all brothers and sisters. That's a basic fact, that we're all connected. For better, and one of the things that the pandemic taught us is, for better or for worse, we're all connected. And we see how something like a virus can affect the whole world. There's no one who hasn't been affected by this. You know.
And it's interesting you mentioned continuity, because not only is this document, it's really a continuation of what he's been teaching in his Wednesday audiences,
That's right.
in his other writings, but it's a continuation of the Church's social teaching too. I mean, there's so much John Paul II and Benedict in this document as well.
There is, and it goes back even further than that. You mentioned earlier today, this is the anniversary of Quadragesimus Anno, Pius XI, I think it was, and the title itself, Quadragesimo Missano, means the 40th anniversary. 40 years ago, it was celebrating Rerum Novarum, really one of the important kickoff social doctrines of the church leading into the 20th century, in the time of the Industrial Revolution and how it affects people. So, the other thing he says is that this pandemic has really exposed an awful lot about false securities. And this is something he had been saying over and over and over again. And in a very tragic way, we recognize that, the things we put a lot of credit into, sometimes even our own health, but the economics, our own well-being, some of the bickering and the fighting that we have, in the end, none of those is going to save us. And in fact, all things are passing. God alone.
Yeah.
God alone is eternal. And so some of the things he critiques, and people, they may get a little uncomfortable in some of these critiques because he takes on all of the different economic systems. It's like I saw one article where the headline was, he derides capitalism. Well, he also goes after socialism and the exploitation of people. But the bottom line is, your salvation is not in economics. Now, having said that, the economic welfare of all is our responsibility. And so that's the balance that he brings us. So, and while it exposed a lot of false securities and a lot of problems in some of our basic assumptions, I also think it brought out the best in so many people. We've seen real heroism, people who put themselves in service to one another in incredible ways during this pandemic.
Yeah, there's one point in one of the paragraphs where he lists how we've seen these great heroes who have laid down their lives. First responders, nurses, doctors, researchers, all of these different people. I think it is a reminder that when push comes to shove, we are reminded that we are our brother's keeper.
That's right, and that's really important. And we do that comes out of us. And connected to that is, again, part of the purpose of this document. This is not just about Catholic teaching. It is very much. It's an encyclical. It's a pretty high form of papal teaching. But he's saying this is human teaching. This is about all people of goodwill. And, we talk about natural law. So some people might be a little uncomfortable that he involves some interreligious dialogue in this. And I understand that, but what he's getting at is these are human truths, natural law, and we've come to discover through the encounter with Christ, but it's based on the truth of who we are created in God's own image and likeness.
And he touches upon this idea of human dignity. And it's interesting, of course, I haven't seen any critics out yet. I think we've beaten them to the punch, maybe. But, one of the possible critiques that some people might throw out here is, on a document on human dignity, he only mentions the unborn once, specifically. However, throughout the whole document, he talks about the dignity of human life.
That's right.
He talks about the dignity of the human person, how the dignity of human living, and how we have to respect it in all its forms. But I think part of the thing is we know as Catholics the dignity of human life from conception to natural. We know that the unborn, the dignity of it, but we also have to remind that, and what I think we've learned from COVID is, the elderly, the sick, the marginalized, the poor, those who don't have any food or sustenance or health care, that these also, that's what COVID has revealed even much so, is that they have a dignity that we don't always respect.
Indeed. Human dignity, really, it comes through over and over and over again in the Holy Father's teaching. And it's the human dignity of every person created in the image and likeness of God. And that has to be the beginning of everything. It's interesting. He talks about a certain kind of deconstructionism, tearing apart human history, kind of forgetting who we are, redefining words and concepts. He talks about the throwaway world, and he says, the best way to dominate and gain control over people is to spread despair and discouragement. in that sense of human dignity, he takes on something very, very interesting, something that we're taking advantage of right now, I think, in a very positive way, social media.
Yeah.
But he talks about this digital world, which sometimes is used not for enhancing human dignity, but rather for tearing it down. In paragraph 42, 43, actually, what happens is paragraph 42 gets listed 42, 42, 44.
Okay. I didn't catch that typo.
Yeah, so it's 43. Digital campaigns of hatred and destruction for their part are not, as some would have us believe, a positive form of mutual support. I'm sorry, it's actually 42 that I want. Oddly enough, while closed and intolerant attitudes towards others are on the rise, distances are otherwise shrinking or disappearing to the point that the right to privacy scarcely exists. Everything has become a kind of spectacle to be examined and inspected, and people's lives are now under constant surveillance. Digital communication wants to bring everything out into the open. People's lives are combed over, laid bare, and bandied about, often anonymously. Respect for others disintegrates, and even as we dismiss, ignore, or keep others distant, we can shamelessly peer into every detail of their lives. And he talks about shameless aggression, and you see that happening in our world today.
Yeah. You know, we talk about trolls, you know, in social media. You know, this is the first anti-troll reference.
Papal anti-troll
reference.
There you go. So it's a marker. And he talks about media responsibility and the media's part in this. And he talks, he jumps later in the document in 154. He talks about the political sphere and how basically we've gotten to a point where you can't even express a concept without being categorized and boxed in and redefined, as it were.
You know, one of the interesting things of course, I read everything through the lens of evangelization because it is what the church is about, you know. It's also my job, too. So,
and you do it well.
So, you know, I think in some ways this is an evangelization document. Every church's document is an evangelization. But, you know, the idea, first of all, St. Francis went to the Sultan to evangelize him. But, of course, it had to be in a different way, you know, and it was with this dialogue, in the context of dialogue, and friendship.
Right.
And that's how our work of evangelization happens, is we have to recognize each other as brother and sister.
Right.
And engage. I mean, and that, I think, is one of the obstacles, one of the 25 obstacles to the new evangelization, is when we ghettoize ourselves and say, well, those people are just pagans, or they're just secularists, and we have nothing to do with them, well, they're not going to get the gospel.
No.
And they're not going to find out who Christ is unless we engage in this genuine friendship.
Unless they see us as representatives of Christ, unless we engage, you're right. And again, we begin with the common experience of truth. It's not subjective. It's not that there's a Christian truth and another truth.
Yeah. And he explicitly says, he condemns relativism in this document. You know, he says relativism is not the answer. You know, in a pluralistic society, that's not the answer.
No, and in fact, what we do is we begin with this. We don't have to be afraid of the truth. We begin with the common experience of the truth.
Yeah.
Again, the human person created in the image and likeness of God.
Yeah.
And then you build on that. And that is a chance for us to be evangelists, to bear witness to the truth. Speaking of evangelization, he brings us to the gospel, doesn't he? You mentioned today's gospel, the parable of the Good Samaritan. And he says, you know, sooner or later, we will all encounter a person who is suffering. And then he asks, will we bend down to touch and heal the wounds of others? Again, that's my experience of these last 6 months. Seeing so many who are willing to either bend down to touch and heal the wounds of others, or people who have made use of social media, for example, in a very positive way, that while we're distant from each other, we're also drawn together, maybe with deeper bonds of faith, hope, and love. People have been very creative, but over and over, I've seen amazing, inspiring instances of people bending down to touch and heal the wounds of others.
And you know, it's interesting, and another paragraph connected to that one, it's paragraph 94, I think. He talks about, even in our charitable action, in our charitable, and the church does such great, wonderful work.
Right.
It can't just be about cutting a check
Right.
or sending people money. That human connection of going out and working, St. Vincent de Paul, when it does its job really, really well, it goes to people's homes and interviews and talks with them. It doesn't just, come here and get food from us, or, like that human engagement in charity, I think, is an important part.
He's very strong on that. He says, social friendship is not just sporadic acts of charity. Mm-hmm. And we talk about random acts of kindness, and don't get me wrong, those are very important. Yeah. We can't underestimate the power of the small things, but it's the power of the small things as part of a heart of charity and also a heart of justice, that we seek to try to build up the lives of one another. Yeah, rather than tear down, we have to seek to build up. And that's what he calls for in us all over and over and over.
It was interesting too, and connected to those was this idea of the need for small community, and that's also, I think, in the section where he talks about solidarity. That on the one hand, we all need community. We need small group community, which I think, those in our pews, or those who aren't in our pews are looking for community, and that's something that we've got to provide in the work of the new evangelization. But on the other hand, we can't just be in little isolated groups. We have to go out again.
That's what he calls about social friendship. It's not just our family, it's not just our community, but it really brings us out. There was another, I think, very important discussion in sections 112 and 113, where he talks about promoting the moral good. It's not just about being community also, but really bearing witness to the true moral good. Nor can we fail to mention that seeking and pursuing the good of others and of the entire family also implies helping individuals and societies to mature in moral values that foster integral human development. And then I love it, paragraph 113. Here, regretfully, I feel bound to reiterate that we have had enough of immorality and the mockery of ethics and goodness, faith and honesty. It's time to acknowledge that light-hearted superficiality has done us no good. Once the foundations of social life are corroded, what ensues are battles over conflicting interests. Again, there is some fundamental truth at the heart of everything else. It's not just, we're not community just for the sake of being together, but that it is about promoting truth and goodness.
Beautiful. He talks about also, and one of the things I was struck by was his, so he does criticize this sort of market-driven capitalism. Right. He also, in paragraph 165, he really critiques liberalism too.
Yes.
And the idea that, there's some flaws with market capitalism, and he brings those out, and he has brought those out. But he also says that, there's no one solution or methodology or economic reason to explain everything, and that there are different courses of actions that prudential judgment might lead us to.
And again, that goes back to that earlier concept that our hope isn't based on any one economic system or political system.
Yeah.
And we're not defined by our political affiliations. We're defined as children of God.
Yeah.
And there's where our hope and well-being is.
And I would probably add to that too. I mean, with all due, I'm not disagreeing with you, but I do think it seems to me sometimes we can get fixated that, well, I have the solution, and this economic theory is going to be the solution to it. But these are prudential, there's no one solution to all these problems.
These are human constructs.
Yeah.
These are human constructs, and a lot of them are good tools. They're very good tools. And it's good even that we argue about it, because that's how we see the pluses and the minuses in these tools. So that healthy debate's a good thing, healthy political debate's a good thing, but these are human constructs to try to achieve justice. but it's true justice. It's God
Yeah.
who is eternal. You know, he talks about the economic system of, you know, like the fall of the economy in around 2008, and it, you know, gets to the heart of some of it. And really, some of it was a recession, but some of it was greed. And some of it was these investment systems that weren't based on any kind of building or productivity, but just basically speculation and buying and selling and trading off, and you know, and without any kind of a real basis, Ponzi schemes and whatnot, all those things that in the end just collapsed. That once the greed is exposed, it all just comes tumbling down.
Then, you know, he talks about dialogue. We mentioned how he, you know, this authentic dialogue is approaching, speaking, listening to each other.
Yes.
It's not relativism. It's not a false tolerance either, he talks about. It is marked by kindness and this sort of renewed encounter that we really do need to talk and listen to each other. And of course, you know, one can't help in reading these sections to think about politics in our own age, in our own day. And really the need for this sort of, I would say, kindness, but also dialogue.
This, and he uses the word of tenderness too. And of course, not only do we think it, we have to believe that he's thinking of these things. He knows the situation of the world, not just out here in our own country, but around the world. And he knows some of the different debates that are going on. And I think he is calling us to something a little bit higher.
He mentions the family as a model. You know that a family, there are quarrels and disagreements in the family, and some of them quite passionate, perhaps even more passionate than what we even see in today's politics. But in the end of the day, no matter what happens in the quarrel, they're still family. That's and right. They still love each other, and they get over this. And I think that's really the lesson I took from this document, is we need to start looking at our brothers, our fellow human beings, as a member of the family. And I can disagree with them, right, and we can even have a heated debate, but in the end of the day, I love them and we can get over it, right, and we can move on. And I think whatever happens in November, that's a lesson we got to keep in mind.
And that we look to build up one another.
Yeah.
We look to build up one another. You know, he addresses some of the issues involving racism. Again, and the importance of listening deeply to one another, recognizing that human dignity. So, yes, that sense of family, that we are indeed connected in that deeper way in the image and likeness of God.
One of the last points I wanted to bring up to you, this paragraph 277, we had talked about this a little bit. Yeah. It's in the context of, and I think there may be some controversy surrounding this paragraph, but the context is that it's within a pluralistic society. The church needs to be able to proclaim the gospel and to preach the gospel, and because the gospel informs our politics.
That's right.
The dignity of the human person and of human life, our approach to all the issues is formed by our Christian faith. And so we have to have that in there. But he says, he talks about how we drink from the source of the gospel in our understanding. But then he says, others drink from other sources. For us, the wellspring of human dignity and fraternity is in the gospel of Jesus Christ. From it there arises for Christian thought and for the action of the church the primacy given to relationship, to encounter with the sacred mystery of the other, to universal communion with the entire human family, and as a vocation for all. So, other people may come to similar conclusions to us about the civil order.
Indeed. Again, this is classic. We talk about natural revelation and supernatural revelation. And so he's talking about our own experience of the encounter with Jesus Christ. And I love, he talks about the music of the gospel. It can't cease to stop. It can't cease. The music of the gospel has to continue. So, but others coming to it a different way. This goes back to what I was talking about before with natural law. These are not simply revealed truths. These are naturally revealed truths. This is what we call natural law, the dignity of the person. And so, yes, however you arrive at it, we have that truth of the encounter with Jesus Christ, and we're not going to step away from that in any way, shape, or form. But this idea of our being, that human solidarity, social friendship, these are universal, and this is something that God implanted in the human soul, in the human heart, so that we can come to know that in the journey.
Beautiful. Bishop, do you have any last thoughts on this document, or maybe, advice on how we might approach it?
I really do think that we need to take it maybe in small bites, because it is so packed. I mean, we did a rapid fire kind of walk through the document. We could have talked more about the dignity of work and the dignity of the person, but I think if we take it bit by bit, then there's so much to unpack, so much to learn. And you mentioned kindness. I love the fact that he ends the letter with 3 paragraphs on kindness. He ends the letter with a certain appeal, and I think that's a call for all of us.
Wonderful. Thank you, Bishop, so much for joining us. I wonder if you might give us your blessing, both those who are following us on social media and those listening to us on St. Gabriel Radio.
Let us turn to the Lord with thanksgiving and hope, and may the blessing of Almighty God, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit descend upon you and your families and remain with you forever and ever. Amen.
Amen. And you've been listening to a special broadcast on Facebook Live, the Diocese feed for Facebook Live, and here on St. Gabriel Radio. I'm Father Adam Streitenberger. With me today has been our beloved Bishop, Bishop Robert Brennan. Thank you so much, Bishop. And
it's always fun to be together here and do these things.
Until next time, peace and all good.